Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'm pleased to follow my colleague Stuart Nash because I think he was picking up on a very important point as we debate the title and commencement of this bill. And in fact, when you consider the title around taxation, GST and remedial matters, it gives you a signal that this was going to be a non-controversial bill. Really, it's inherent in the title that this will not be an issue, a bill that creates any divisions in the Parliament, and indeed, until this morning at 9:30 or thereabouts, it hadn't done that. It had proceeded quite amicably through the process of the Finance and Expenditure Committee. It had been done in a bipartisan fashion. Some good, sensible amendments had been wrought through the Select Committee process. We'd had submissions and heard other people's views on the bill to make sure that it did implement the measures that the government wanted to see implemented. And then, effectively out of nowhere, came the 70-page supplementary order paper, which really, I think, complicates the process and makes it very difficult for a rational decision-making process to take place. It came out of nowhere, and the Minister asserted that there was indications to it. We certainly didn't see that through the Select Committee. And to say that an SOP of that magnitude, 70 pages of complex detail, tabled in the Parliament just on Tuesday, is not appropriate. It's not appropriate to the title for what should be a non-controversial bill, a bill which proceeds through the Parliament, a kind of a wash-up kind of bill that creates no issue between parties that simply want to resolve technical tax adjustments of an annual basis and similar adjustments. And yet here we are at 7:30, 2 weeks out from Christmas on a Friday evening, debating a bill which has got attached to it a major order paper which really sees the title needing to be changed to reflect that enormous addition that SOP brings. Because there is major substance in the SOP, major changes introduced to it, and the Parliament has got no opportunity other than this very constrained chance through the committee stages and third reading of this bill to consider what ramifications that are brought by that bill under the current title. And I think that it brings quite considerable risks of error, which we may need to revisit as a Parliament. That's certainly the history of anybody who follows the legislative process. Rushed legislation is bad legislation. There are occasional needs for it to be done, and we as a party have not stood in the way of some of those changes. And I think back to the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Bill, not a single member of this House opposed that legislation. But when you've got a technical tax bill, as reflected in the title of Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill, then I think it's incumbent upon the Minister that he does not introduce controversial late changes of the scale and order that he did, which really skew the original purpose of the bill and are not truly reflected in the title that is front of the House. And one of the risks that I think this brings is for the IRD. The IRD, let's face it, nobody likes particularly paying tax. They have a difficult task. Their job is to be, I think the phrase is fair, and to collect the revenue, and we uphold them in their duty and acknowledge the work that they do. But where a bill with an order paper of the size under the title as introduced comes through the Parliament at a great rate of knots and brings with it very high risks of error that have not been picked up by the usual process, then inevitably there are two parties that wear those risks, probably three in fact. The first is the government, but technical tax bills are not likely to create enormous public disorder. But secondly, they create issues for taxpayers, and they will find a venue for their wrath, and the likely place that will be deposited, I suggest, is with the IRD. So I have some sympathy for the IRD officials. I'm sure if they were able to speak, they would not be suggesting that this is the process that they favoured. I'm sure they would want the comfort that the Select Committee process provides by way of scrutiny, by way of public submission. So when you get a bill introduced with an SOP of this scale, which isn't truly reflective of the title that it came into this House with in August, then you have to have some very, very serious concerns. There are alternative names for the bill that it could be retitled. One that comes to mind is the Jonathan Coleman Mark II bill, reflecting the fact that the last time the Minister had a major piece of legislation in the House. Mr Chair? Mr Chair? Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr Chair. The last time the Minister had a major piece of legislation in the House and entrusted that to another Minister, and the Minister and the Chair had better be a bit wary and check her speech notes. If she's got any tonight to speak, just double check that they are reflective of the Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill and not another piece of tax legislation, because although Mr Dunn apologised profusely for that and accepted that it was his office's error, I think that Jonathan Coleman copped the flak for that, and it was his reputation that suffered. So I do suggest to the Minister for Social Development, sitting in the chair tonight in the place of the Minister for Inland Revenue, that she watch very carefully if she has speech notes, that they are the right speech notes, and she's not going to be given the sort of moniker that Jonathan Coleman earned in respect of another tax bill speech notes that he had to read. Another name for the bill could be Here I Come Ottawa. Here I Come Ottawa, because we know that, the word is that Mr Dunn may be in his last term in the Parliament and that he might be looking for a posting overseas, and Ottawa is a posting that tends to go to sort of middle-level kind of politicians finishing their career. And I'm sure he'd make a very good High Commissioner to Ottawa. I'm sure he'd serve us faithfully. But I have to say,
you get the Caribbean at the same time.
You get the Caribbean.
Yes,
Gee, that must be really nice in December. That must be really nice in December to escape from Ottawa to the Caribbean, because the winters are fairly bleak. But the Minister is a competent Minister, and that's been the surprise with this bill, because the hallmark of this man through 25 plus years, a quarter of a century in this Parliament, has been one of sober habits, one who brought through legislation when he was a Minister, which generally was well structured, was introduced in the appropriate time frames, and gave the right time for scrutiny by select committees and by Parliament. So this is a surprise to us that we are dealing with a bill with the title of the Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill, which has got this. I mean, it's kind of like the locomotive is the bill as reflected by the title, but behind it is this train of many carriages reflected by the SOP. And it's perhaps we could call it, we could pick up a locomotive title for the bill. But another possibility might be the Mantle of Jerry Brownlee bill, because in terms of competence, there is another minister who vies for the sort of title of not having the best command of the House's practices. But Peter Dunn, by bringing in this bill in this fashion with this huge collected train of an SOP of 70 pages, bigger by 13 pages than the original bill, really is bringing the House into some considerable risk of disrepute as those tax changes unfold and the implications of them come through for us as a House and a Parliament. So I do expect, as a member of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, that this may not be the last we see of this bill, of the Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill, perhaps soon to be Act, because I do believe we will be revisiting this issue, or at least the SOP that's attached. In terms of the commencement times, I do note, and my colleague Stuart Nash touched upon this, the varying commencement times for the various clauses of the bill, and they do date back, right back, I think 2005-06, and the changes to the taxation treatment in respect of accommodation issues. So there is an issue of retrospective with this bill, retrospectivity, as introduced, and that's always something that we have to be very cautious with as a House. Obviously, there are a whole range of issues unfold when we start trying to pass legislation which deal with past issues and validating issues that have been in play for sometimes a number of years. And so we've got several commencement dates varying from, in terms of Section 104, coming into force on 1st of January 2005. So we're stepping back nearly 6 years. Nearly 6 years we're stepping back in terms of retrospectivity in respect of that bill. Sections 88, 90, 92, 93 coming into force on the 1st of April. So again, that 5-year plus time frame. Section 92 coming into force on the 1st of April 2006. Section 90B and 91 coming into force on 1st of October 2007. Section 11 coming into force on the 30th of November 2007. And then we're coming up to more recent times with Section 64 and 82 coming into force in October 2008. and sections 31 and a whole range of others which I won't bore the House with reading, coming into force from the 1st of April 2010. So we're into this year, we're into the home straight in respect of the retrospectivity of the measures.